Hello and welcome to this online event, part of Bloomsday Montreal's 2022 festivities. I'm Kathleen Fee, Artistic Director of the festival, and we've called today's event The Cutting Edge: Creation, Innovation, Carving a Path. We have two pre-recorded interviews, each just over 20 minutes long. You'll meet three writers, all women, and one extraordinary man, the founder of Festival Bloomsday Montreal. Now, before going any further, we want to acknowledge that we are based on the unceded indigenous territory of Diodiage, and that the Ganyigahaga Mohawk Nation is the custodian of these lands and waters. First up, we have former broadcast journalist Anne Lewis in conversation with David Schurman, without whom none of this would be happening. It was the unselfish kindness of her father's urging that led Anne Lewis to leave the war-torn environment of the family home in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Her varied career has included work as a TV writer-reporter, a university lecturer, a creative writer, and a coach. She focuses on working with narrative in her coaching practice, using it as a basis for co-creating directed change with her clients. In 2018, she founded a coaching resource supporting inner narrative work at mecoaching.me. Anne was honored at the 2021 Festival Bloomsday as the 2021 Festival Bloomsday Spotlighted Writer. Now, among her published works is a contribution to Leonard Cohen, Untold Stories, Volume 2, Michael Posner, Simon & Schuster, 2021. Now, without more ado, here is Anne's conversation with David Schurman, a former educator and senior college administrator, a scientist, a marvelous home chef, a talented amateur painter, a lover of dance, theater, opera, music, and literature, and above all, the famous book honored by the festival he founded, Ulysses, by James Joyce.
Hi everyone, and a warm welcome. I'm Anne Lewis, and I'm talking today to the Bloomsday founder, David Schurman. David, we're here at the horse's mouth today. How did you get from biology at Sir George Williams to becoming the founder of Bloomsday Montreal?
Well, there's a long story which we will make quite short if we can. I loved biology. I went into biology at Sir George Williams University. And at the same time, I just thought of something which Sir George did at the time. They've ensured that every single student took an introductory composition and literature course for every program. And I always liked literature. I always loved it. And I also had this idea in my head that I'd heard about Ulysses by James Joyce. I thought it was a complex work, that it was very controversial. And you know what? It was a challenge. So I went and bought it, and here it is.
What's
My
that?
little prop, my little James Joyce's Ulysses, and it was purchased in 1964, in March of '64, and I started reading it at that point, as I was also doing courses in biology, and from there to 2011 is a long, much longer story. But I kept reading it. I kept understanding that I understood maybe 12% the first read through, and then it went up slowly but surely. So I've read it quite a number of times, and every time you get more and more and more out of it. And to cut to 2011, that's when I decided to give a group at McGill Community for Lifelong Learning on Ulysses. And these are 20-hour groups, 10 weeks at 2 hours a week. So it was, I don't know why I did it that way. When I think of it, I must be nuts. You can't study Ulysses well at all in 20 hours. It's just impossible. 935 pages. But we did a group. There were 16 people in the group. They did very, very well. We did a really good overview of that, of Ulysses. And from the group itself came the idea of using or having a Bloomsday Festival, which of course is big in Dublin and various other parts of the world, but there was none that we knew of in Montreal. And that's sort of how it started.
So what was your original idea then when you decided that you wanted to start a festival?
Well, the idea was to get Ulysses out there so that people would understand, try to understand it. It was a pivotal work in the 20th century literature. And, we just thought there are people that are interested in Joyce and in Irish literature and culture. So the thing became not only about Ulysses, it was primarily the first year a lot about Ulysses, but also about the Irish culture, Irish literature, Irish music, and frankly, having fun also at the same time as you did all those things. So we decided, yeah, let's do something where it had always, and so the very first one we did in 2012 has had two major things which have never changed, and that is academic look, or an academic, we call panels or groups that are always held at Concordia, and which examine aspects of Ulysses itself, and sometimes other literature from Ireland, and also that we did readings on the very final day, which always was set as the 16th of June, which of course is Bloomsday, the actual day on which Leopold Bloom walks around Dublin on June the 16th, 1904. And those are always part of the group, and they still are at this moment.
So that famous day, but let me just backtrack a little bit with you. How did you go from having this idea with this group at McGill to actually making the festival happen?
Yes, there's a challenge. We happened to luck out because at the moment that we were going to propose this, MCLL, it's now called, used to be called MILR, Institute for Learning and Retirement, but at the time they had a grant from the McConnell Corporation Foundation, I should say, and it was pretty substantial, but no one seemed to know what to do with the money. And I said, I got an idea. So this if it had not had that money, I don't know what, it may not have ever happened at all. But with that grant, we were able to establish the first year's program. And we went through the council of McGill's learning group, which I was on the council, and my wife, by the way, I should mention that Judith Ann, my wife, was very pivotally in the beginning of this as well. And we got people together, 4 or 5 people, some of which are still here today, and you will see them later on in Bloomsday, and that is Kevin Wright, for instance, and Louise Cochon, and Astrid Torvik, a number of people that are pivotal in the whole thing. And I almost forgot one important person, Gus O'Gorman. Gus O'Gorman sadly passed away, but he was really, really interested in getting into Bloomsday on. He was a member of the Irish community, and not only was he a member of the community, he was passionate about Ulysses. And in fact had done a few little one-day things in the past at Hurley's Pub on Bloomsday. So he was very, very important. And ultimately, of course, the Irish community supported us. Not at the beginning, but they did come on board for sure.
So is McGill still involved now, or what?
Yeah, so at the beginning, this was it became a bit of a problem because McGill is not set up. It's not an institution set up to run this kind of a event. And it really isn't. And yet it's because we had to go through all their committees, we had to use all their logos, we had to get permission on everything. The whole financial thing became difficult, shall we say. But so after 2 full years, we pulled ourselves away from McGill and set up a nonprofit organization where we had control, we had our own bylaws, and we could get grants, and which was the successful thing about it. After in the 3rd year, we ended up getting grants because we knew the McConnell grant would disappear very quickly. And Judith, my wife, and a couple of others were pivotal in getting funds from Canadian Heritage in Ottawa, and other groups like Tony Waite got us, who was a very important early member. He got us funding from Zeller's Corporation and various other groups. And the funding, of course, is vital. And guess what? We still have it. almost all of it is not only is it still there, it's grown in the last 10 years, and very, very vital, of course. And the grants, I mean, we're certainly thankful for them, because we would not be here without the grants. It's really as simple as that. And of course, a lot of volunteer work from a lot of different people. And poor old Gus, he loved the thing. He was a great contributor at the beginning. So, you know, the first year, I should just mention the first year, but I've been looking right here on the desktop here. I have the first year's program. And when I look at it now, I think, how did we do it? In 3 days, we packed in more stuff than is in the next, even this year's 6 days. I'm serious. We miscalculated the amount of time needed. Things were pushed together too much. Anyway, you know, but I'm very happy to see that it has grown to a second decade, that it has informed many, many people about this great, great book, and about many, many aspects of Irish literature, Irish culture, music. We've done all kinds of things on music, on plays, and it's slowly but surely growing to effectively, as Michael Keneally, who was just departed as head of the School of Irish Studies at Concordia, said, the second largest Bloomsday festival on earth.
Wow, really?
Which is pretty hard to almost believe. I keep thinking, no, he's got to be right. But I'll tell you, there aren't too many that have run a festival that's 5 or 6 days and which have the kind of diversity that we have. There's none in this country. Toronto does one, usually quite a nice one day, the 16th of June, they do one thing. And there's a couple of other places that do it, but it's not. Montreal is the place where it's done really seriously for almost a week. So I'm quite proud of that, actually. I think that we succeeded in getting something never here before, which I can now pretty well say, and I'd hope this at the beginning, will become an annual feature in the Montreal scene.
I'd like to say I think that you are the secret sauce for the success, the incredible success of Montreal Bloomsday, which is, as you say, the second largest in the world. It's pretty amazing. I'd like to ask you if you could give me an idea, what more do you think going forward could be offered to the cultural life of Montreal and the world for that point?
Well, you know, we have started to do things like outside. It's usually the first few years, it was only like 3-4 days. It moved up to 5 days festival with all kinds of events, readings, poetry readings, a cabaret thing. We had support from almost all of our local libraries, like Atwater Library and the Jewish Public Library, and fantastic work and help from these people, Westmount Library being one of the most important also. And we now have expanded it. So we do a thing on the birthday of James Joyce, which is the 2nd of February, when it was his birth date, and other events as they come. We may do stuff during the year with, for example, musical groups. We had Boomerang, which was did a very nice concert in, I think it was before the end of fall last year. And these kind of things are expanding. And we're thinking and doing more and more stuff. We're just trying to expand the ideas of things that are related to literature, related to the culture, but not specifically only on James Joyce's Ulysses. We usually reserve that kind of day, that academic day, to that one day in every one of the festivals held at Concordia, which was, interestingly, they ended up, in a way, although it was founded at McGill, you mentioned this question, I should answer it. It was founded at McGill. The funding came through McGill, and ultimately it got pulled away. Its focus became more and more Concordia and the School of Irish Studies, because the School of Irish Studies is so vitally important in this whole area in the city of Montreal. But, you know, it was, I think it's going to become a more broad-based festival. It's going to do things that are, and has actually started to do things outside of the specific time in June. And involve a lot more people in the area of Irish culture, Irish music, developing groups that want to do musical material. And I think all that will help us bring us more funding and more diversity. And my hope is, is to get into the running or into the involvement of this festival, younger people that can carry it on. After all, I'm not getting any younger. And, 10, 12 years, we're running down the clock, the old folks keeping this running. But there are new younger people, and that's my hope, that they will end up carrying on the torch. And there's a lot more stuff that can be done. All you have to do to see what they can do is go to the Dublin site for the Bloomsday Festival, and you'll see huge numbers of things. And they, of course, have an advantage. They actually are in the city where Ulysses was set. So that's something we can operate. But we have brought in tours. We brought in tours with Donovan King. He's doing another one this year, a haunted tour, I think it is, but we've done ones on Griffintown and the development of the Irish inhabitants here in Montreal. It's endless, the kind of things we can do, I think.
You actually did get the idea when you were in Dublin all those years ago. Am I correct?
Actually, that's true. Judith and I went there in 2000 and was it 7 or 8? I think it was 8, 2008. And we had gone on a little tour of England, and then we went over to Ireland and spent a few days, and we ended up in Dublin on the Bloomsday Festival, and we could see certain things that they did, which we thought, and this was like 4 years later, we actually suddenly came back to us, there's some ideas that we could use, and we did. The first one we did on the very first Bloomsday was we had an open air reading of Ulysses on the 16th of June. Wow. in McGill, outside in I think it's called the James McGill Amphitheater. It's an outside venue, and that was really tricky to do, I'll tell you. And it was the last time we decided to do that one. But got a lot of ideas from Dublin. Yep, it's true. And
when you compare the original emotional feeling that you had when you were in Dublin and you discovered it to begin with, and for example, what we're going to be experiencing this year and hopefully next year, do you think it's true to the spirit of what you felt?
Yeah, although, it's funny, when we were there, we weren't thinking about developing a Bloomsday. This was 2008. This is before we actually began more seriously considering it. But I think when the idea came up in this group in 2011, I thought, yeah, you know what, we could do it. We have a big Irish population in Quebec and certainly in Montreal. A lot of support probably available. And and some of the ideas that we got from Dublin could be implemented right here. So I think it had, I don't know, not a direct, but a sort of a subconscious thing in there in our brains thinking, when it became something we could do, yes, and we know how they do it in Dublin. And they're still doing it, of course, for, I don't know, they started in the 1950s. So they're Bloomsday. And of course, this year is a special year for anyone who hasn't remembered. It was on February the 2nd, 1922, that James Joyce published this book. So it's the 100th anniversary of the book. And I think that's one of the reasons we're going to be concentrating on that topic in our academic panels and in other things. And of course, there's been dozens of articles written about it this year, just on this anniversary. Anyway.
Wow. I'd really like to congratulate you on behalf of everybody who has enjoyed the festival over the years. It's really, truly an amazing accomplishment. Thank you very much.
Well, you're most welcome. And I hope that people do go and that remember, behind the scenes, there's dozens of people involved in making it all happen. I'm pulling myself away, the old guy going into retirement. Anyway, yes, I hope it does the thing I've always wanted, and raise awareness about this wonderful book and have more and more people get involved with reading it, understanding it. Don't try to read it all at one shot. You need to use audio versions, and you need to just go into groups and talk about it. It always works better that way, but enjoy. It's not just work. It's an enjoyable, amusing, funny, great novel. One of the greatest ones of the 20th century. So go for it.
Thank you so very much indeed for giving us your time today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and enjoy the festival.
That was fascinating. Thank you so much, Anne and David, for really getting into it and passing the torch, which is what this is all about, carving a path. We're so glad that David and Judith did all the heavy lifting in the early years, and we're reaping the rewards today, able to spotlight Montreal writers, giving them the recognition that Joyce did not enjoy in his native city back in the day. Anne Lewis was last year's Spotlight Writer, and this year it's another brilliant woman from Northern Ireland, poet and performer Rachel McCrum. Rachel was the first BBC Scotland poet in residence. Now based in Montreal, she has performed and taught poetry and performance in North America, Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. In workshops, she fuses theater, poetry, and visual arts, granting participants the space and time to speak unabashedly for themselves. Her first poetry collection is published in a bilingual edition, English and French. It has been described as providing a soulful yet defiant collection of structures, sounds, and voices. Now, interviewing Rachel is a new member of our Bloomsday family, actress and writer Samara O'Gorman, who is now editor of our newsletter, Joyicity. She's in Irish studies at Concordia University, and she's currently studying in Dublin, having won a scholarship. Her research will focus on Irish language, folklore, and folk poetry. In June of 2020, Samara founded Your Local Samaritan, an initiative that brings people together through acts of generosity and kindness. And in June of 2021, Samara became a published author with her debut poetry collection, What If the Sun Died? After just one day, the book became a #1 bestseller in the mythological storytelling category. Here she is in conversation with the remarkable, resourceful, creative, and talented Rachel McCrum.
Good day, everyone. Happy Bloomsday Festival. My name is Samara O'Gorman. I am a Montreal-based actress, writer, and community poet. I'm currently a scholar at the School of Irish Studies in Concordia University, researching and studying Irish language, folklore, and poetry. And I'm also the new Joyicity newsletter editor. And today, I'm very happy to be interviewing Rachel McCrum. Rachel is a poet, she's a performer and a workshop facilitator. She's originally from Northern Ireland, and I'm sure she'll tell you a lot more about that, but she now calls Montreal home. She's a part of the Quebec Writers Federation, is editor of Font magazine, which I really had to get involved with. And it's always nice to connect with a fellow poet. I'd like to mention that Marlene from Bloomsday actually introduced us about a month ago now. And I just want to firstly thank you, Rachel, for taking the time out of your day to be with us at Bloomsday.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
For sure. So the first question I have for you today is about this newsletter's theme for this year, and it's actually ripples, as in like the ripple effect. And since it's the 100th year since the publication of Ulysses, it's the anniversary, we want to, as a festival, kind of find links between Ulysses having been published and then the spectrum along the way to Irish culture today. And James Joyce's writing he's given others permission to kind of break the mold of how storytelling has been done in the past and how it's done now. And as an Irish scholar and Irish language scholar myself, I can't help but see all of these links all the time between Indigenous languages in Ireland and the culture of the Irish, and between other groups all around the world. So for my first question for you, I'm just wondering if you've ever seen these links, or if this has fascinated you, or if you've ever engaged with it in your own work.
I mean, absolutely, and particularly since moving to Quebec, actually. So I came over in 2017. I was in Edinburgh in Scotland for 6 years before that, which is a really interesting time to be in Scotland as well, because you know, there's a massive revival of Scots and the Gaelic in Scotland going on, and looking at what that meant. And all my family's still in Northern Ireland. So I should say, first of all, I mean, looking at Joyce and Samuel Beckett as well are walking advertisements for multilingualism, because their use of language is so informed by the fact that they spoke multiple languages. You know, they worked as translators at various points. They were moving around Europe. And so that all filters back into their use of language, I think, as much as their complex relationship with Irishness. And so, I mean, we see that, talking about ripples today, I'm a huge fan of Emer McBride. I just finished Strange Hotel, her latest. And I think she, more than Anna Burns, I think, with Milkman's had that flow as well. I think you could see the echoes there of how the language was used, and it's using English but in a very different way, and how that complicates and creates its own vernacular of English, I think is really interesting to me. But particularly looking at indigeneity. So, I mean, I was in Northern Ireland for 18 years, and I say my family's still there, so it's still home. And my parents at the minute are just outside Strangford Lough, in a place that's called Kilief. It's actually spelled Kilclief. The C is silent, just to make things easy.
Wow.
And Kilief, when go back to the Irish, the original Irish means Church of the Wattle Daub, because that area, it's near Downpatrick, it's near Nendrum Monastery. There was a lot of early settlement there with Christians, but there was a huge influence of the Irish language. And so what you see, particularly, I mean, it's something Brian Friel explored in Translations in 1980, yes. And it's still one of the best explorations of that relationship between naming and the naming of places. And so this relationship between the Irish and the landscape, the land, the connection to the land in place names is still evident and is still incredibly apparent. And, you know, it's something you just grow up with. It's just there. You know that the landscape is embodied and has been named and has been passed down through these place names, and this strange, not quite Irish, definitely not English middle ground with them, you know. And so, you know, Derry originally means oak. It's from the Irish for oak. You've got Knock is hill, I think, and Drum is ridge, and, you know, Derg is red, and you'll see all these place names around this, and they're connected to the land. So that connection to land and landscape has always been really important to me, because I think it's just a part of what we have growing up. And I was interested when I moved to Montreal and to Quebec, and I was like, okay, if I'm going to arrive here, if I'm going to land here, I need to understand the land better, and I need to understand the namings. And of course, here, that relationship to land is held within the Indigenous namings, which have also largely disappeared. So it drives me crazy that, like, you know, we're in Montreal or Jojagi or Minyang or whatever the naming will be, depending on the people. But I can't find the Indigenous name for the Mont, but for the Montreal, like the mountain. Yeah. And I'm like, but it's the big landmark. Like, you know, what's the story? Where's the giant who lives under that? You know, what was the turtle's back that broke up through the earth? You know, there's got to be something around it. So I'm still in the hunt for that. But I was interested in this, and I was interested when I arrived over, and it sort of clarified and crystallized a wish to go back and understand that more with the Irish. So I ended up working with, I did a course with Dr. Sharon Blackie. I don't know if you know her work. She's great, and she takes a very scholarly approach, I would say, to Celtic folklore, Celtic spirituality, Celtic, placing the indigeneity of Celtic practices within Indigenous places and languages and cultures around the world. And she's quite ruthless about what is what might just be like a story that's sort of bubbled up at a later time, or somebody's just made up somewhere and sort of like, no, this is what we can glean from the archaeology and the land and all the rest of it. And so that was the first time I'd sort of actually sat down and looked at how the Irish culture and the language and the deep connection to the land, and also casting the land as feminine in a lot of ways, the connection to seasonality, the connection to light, placed it within an Indigenous context. And that's really heartening to me. That's really exciting. Flip side is I'm Northern Irish Protestant, so I don't actually speak Irish apart from all these place names. So that's the next step. But yeah, it's been very rich as a thread to follow.
For sure. And I'm sure you could also appreciate, just as a poet yourself, these places with these place names, it's always the second step of researching why they're called that, and then researching the name itself, and then the origin, and it makes it so much more rich. I always find, especially if you want to use that in your own poetry, I feel like naming particular things and using particular natural elements in poetry always adds another element to it. And actually something else we have in common other than poetry is our advocacy for mental health, which I think is very important. Rachel, it was really lovely to see that you have received training in mental health first aid from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, which is so lovely. This is brilliant. And when I host my own talks and workshops, I always kind of showcase that poetry can be a tool for healing, and healing through creative expression is so powerful. And since you are a professional workshop facilitator, tell us why poetry, in your own words, why this medium can aid individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm going to give full credit to ELAN, which is the English Language Arts Network over here, and their excellent Artists Inspire workshop program, which they've been running for the past few years, and Christy Huff and Graham Jabor and Louise Campbell and all the ones who do a really amazing job, multidisciplinary, and they placed us out in mostly secondary schools around the province, and they've really worked to find training for us, you know, and professionalize this this field, and there's a community now, so we talk about it, you know, there's a community of practice developing around what we're doing and what we're not doing with arts education. And so, I mean, specifically with that, and particularly looking with adolescents, with poetry, you know, there's a naming, there's a naming of the internal to the external, in a way that you hope somebody else will understand. You know, my favorite, to go back to Joyce, just because this is a Bloomsday related thing, you know, one of my favorite Joyce lines, which isn't in Ulysses, I don't think, is, you know, when he wrote to Nora to join him, and he wrote, "Is there one who understands me?" And I love that line. I think that's it's one of the most beautiful lines, and it's that connection we're seeking. And with poetry, with, you know, metaphor, with externalizing internal feelings in a way that we hope somebody can understand the tangibility of these feelings for us. And I think that's what poetry gives us. In a much more structural way, it's a freedom of expression that doesn't sit within the normal structures, and it shouldn't. It should be slant. It should be the alternative namings, you know. And I think, you know, when I'm working with adolescents, particularly, I have a real thing, like 13 to 15 is such a brilliant age range to work with, because they haven't quite got the self-consciousness yet, but they're you know, there's a self-awareness and a questioning of the world as well at that age. And so giving them the tools to express themselves, which are not graded, which do not sit within a standard education system, which misses out, you know, so many of the ones who, you know, have attention disorders or are struggling with mental health or whatever it is, and just go, okay, there's no right answer on this. This is what you do. This is for you to decide whether this is right or wrong. I'm not going to mark this. I'm just going to tell you you're brilliant all the time. But apart from that, you know, and what freedom can we give you with that? And so often I find with those workshops is it's the ones who maybe aren't doing so well academically who really engage with it, you know, because they need that alternative. And the other thing we found is, you know, I mean, pre-pandemic, it was estimated that 20% of youth in Canada which is conservative, I think, have been affected by mental illness in some way. That's pre-pandemic. What we're looking at now, where they've gone through 2 years of anxiety, they're still in a very anxious state. They're anxious about climate change. They're anxious about war. They're anxious about racism. They're so anxious. And how can we give them the tools to talk about this, to think this through, to let their brains go through that process of reflection? You know, all of that is key. And in a political context as well, just to tie it up, I think it also goes back to the fact that when I was coming through Northern Ireland in the 90s, so Heaney was huge for us. I mean, Heaney was, because he won his Nobel 95, I think, so Seamus Heaney.
Yes.
And Heaney always engaged with the political. And he always named it. And actually the arts in Northern Ireland throughout the Troubles, particularly theatre as well, were a space where dialogue could occur, where the things that could not be said normally were allowed to be said. And so I've always carried that with me. And whether that's at political, whether that's at the personal level, you know, that's what it's for.
No, perfect. I think you articulated that amazingly. I can't agree with you more that I really do believe that poetry like unlocks the subconscious mind in a way. It puts pen to paper about things that we don't particularly want to say, but our minds want to say it. And that's why I think it's so important for the youth. So I really want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing with that age range, especially. And now that we're talking about feelings, I thought I could go into my next question. Tell me what it's like to be Irish born and living in Canada when you're currently observing Irish literature and political movements, like you had just mentioned, from afar at the moment. And how is it being over here? How has that impacted your writing and your work? I know your books speak to these themes and these themes of environment and family and leaving home. So just tell us a bit about that.
So that's a really good question. And it's just sort of kicked me in the heart slightly, I have to say, but in a good way, because actually, speaking of the feelings that we don't really want to talk about, that was coming out. That's been coming out a lot. And you know, I mean, I've been here 5 years now, and I'm only starting to see what the next book, what the next writing is about, and it's part of that sensation as arrival. And I kind of knew that, like the first book, The First Blast to Awaken Women Degenerate, it's very much about movement. It's a little bit about leaving, but it's also really just about the mechanisms of movement and displacement as well. Displacement was a big theme to the book. And I kind of knew when I moved over, I was like, oh, I wonder what it'll be like to write a book about arriving somewhere. And then what I discovered was there's a lot of guilt involved. There's some shame involved. There's sort of, you know, what is it? Movers remorse, leavers guilt, whatever it is. You know, my family's back over there, and it's Northern Ireland for me. So, although, well, there's a big election tomorrow. I know this is going to go out later when we're recording it, but tomorrow is a very significant election for us. And so in some ways, the sociological changes and the political changes that we've seen in Ireland, in the south of Ireland, as I would say, you know, whether it's the abortion referendum, whether it's, you know, gay marriage finally being legalized, whether it's, you know, so much sort of such huge social change at a really fast, wonderful rate. And I have to say, a breaking away from the church and the conservatism of the church that's been amazing. That has not hit Northern Ireland. And that's not to say it hasn't hit the population. I mean, Northern Ireland is full of the best people in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, we've seen amazing things like Array Collective won the Turner Prize last year, which is this gang of, you know, queer, feminist, outrageous, radical artists who are running about East Belfast, I think, and doing things. But politically, we are stuck with some absolute dinosaurs and some really hateful ones. So, yeah, there's a lot of, you know, watching from afar and always feeling that sensation of going, how much do I weigh in over there? Because I'm sort of sitting in Canada wagging my head at this, you know, and you're like, well, you're not actually on the ground doing any work with it, are you? So it's complicated, but actually I think being able to articulate that and being able to go, I think this is a natural part of moving and being away. And actually, what is it that I can do over here that I could bring back You know, what are the learnings over here? Again, going back to Sharon Blackie, she's got this great phrase about how you develop the relationship with the place where your feet are planted. You know, if you have moved away, how do you make that relationship significant as well? Whether that's bringing your own culture, your language with you, or embracing that which is here without appropriating, but paying respect and due honor to it, you know. So trying to match those things up is interesting. At a purely literary point of view, I am so excited about what's coming out of Ireland at the minute. You know, as I said, I mentioned Emer McBride earlier. We've also got Sally Rooney going on. We've got Wendy Erskine, who I really, really like, Jan Carson, and they're all, see, the best voices at the minute, they're all female, and that's huge, you know. So yeah, that's very exciting, very exciting.
I think we are in a very good place at the moment. And since Bloomsday obviously always circles back to James Joyce and Ulysses, I want to know if the characters of Leopold Bloom and Stephen Dedalus, or the stories that they have, you know, have they inspired your work or writing in any shape? And it doesn't only have to be Ulysses, it could be James Joyce as a whole, or if, you know, himself has been a role model in your work. I'm interested in that because we've talked a lot about your poetry and these feelings, and I'm wondering if you've ever gone back to Joyce in any realm.
I have actually, and it's Molly Bloom rather than Stephen or
yes.
or Leopold. So I would say I actually I had joined a choir over here with the amazing André Papatomas, who, you know, was sort of, yeah, he's just phenomenal. And it was a concert, and we were doing it in a big, slightly decrepit church in sort of southeast Montreal, near Papagnon. And he wanted to do part of the Molly Bloom monologue. Not all of it, because it's very long. Very, very long. But he wanted to do, he really likes the repeated yeses, and he wanted to play with the sound. And he sort of suggested, and I went, well, Andre, if you're doing that, I would like to do that, please. Like, I claimed this one. And so I ended up memorizing like the last sort of page and a half, the very beautiful bit, the very lyrical bit. And, you know, with the choir and with sort of instruments and the yeses and all the rest of it. And I hadn't read Joyce for a very long time. And I'd forgotten how much I love the rhythm of the language and how it speeds up my brain, you know. I think it does once you get into it, right? Like it affects the brainwaves somehow. And there was an embrace back to English with that for me. I'd sort of felt quite divorced from the way the Irish speak English, because it's not the same as Canadian English. And also my partner's Francophone, so I sort of am learning to live half in French as well, which is a very different kettle of fish. But it's done funny things to how I use language and how I respond. And so going back to Molly, and just her rapture and her lack of shame and her defiance and all the rest of it, I was like, yeah. And I think, so that was huge for me, yeah. And I think as well, I just have to give a shout out, because last Bloomsday you had Kevin Birmingham on. And I think his book, The Most Dangerous Book in the World, is phenomenal in terms of actually an introduction to Joyce as anything else, much as anything else. And I love, I mean, there's so much in that book. There's censorship. There's how much Joyce was situated in the body and how ill he was, which you didn't realize. Like, he was writing as a very sick man a lot of the time. And actually that, I think he queered the norm for masculinity in a lot of ways with that. But also it was the women who got him published, you know, it was the radical women who got him published. And I think Kevin's book recenters that to a really beautiful degree. And so that was, even the story around it was inspirational as well. It's been good to reconnect with.
For sure. And I loved that you brought up Molly's monologue, because I had a class that was just Ulysses at Concordia. So we spent the entire semester reading it. And it's fabulous. So much of a journey. You get frustrated, you love some parts, you stop reading, you keep reading, you pick it up again. But the last episode with Molly, oh my, I read it straight through, and it's still to this day my favorite. And I want to get a shirt that says yes, and those who get it, and those who don't. So it's just wonderful that you brought that up.
I said yes.
Yes. Well,
I love it. Please
Rachel,
do and send me one.
yes, it's a plan. I thank you so much for being here with me today. Happy Bloomsday, and
And
I
you.
wish you all the luck within your current projects and workshops and from one poet to another. I really hope I see you at an open mic sometime soon so we can share a poetry together. And if there's anything you want to plug or say, the floor is yours right now.
I'm just going to wish everybody a happy Bloomsday. What I will actually say because obviously this is going out to an audience of
Yes.
Joyce fans. Next time you're in Dublin, get thee to the Museum of Literary Ireland, which has opened on the side of St. Stephen's Green. You will note that the acronym is Molly, which they did very well. It's absolutely beautiful. And I think for anyone, whether a scholarly or a passing interest or an enthusiasm for Ulysses, it is, it's just an eye opener. And they've got the first edition. I know, I can see your face. I also had that reaction. The big blue book is there, and it's just wonderful, and there's a reinterpretation and a pulling apart. So treat yourselves and head out to that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Samara. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, that was amazing. Thanks to Anne, to David, to Samara and Rachel for sharing their thoughts, their work, their devotion to literature, to their lives and their insights. It is really marvelous to hear the ripples from Ireland to Canada, Quebec, and Montreal. The search for source, for Indigenous names, origin stories, poetry, musicality, individuality, and community, all of which were freely expressed in Joyce's two great novels, Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. As Rachel said, externalizing internal feelings. Now that's what Joyce dared to do. It's still shocking today. And as we know, there's a lot of pushback. Imagine the reaction when Ulysses was published 100 years ago. There is just so much for us to appreciate, to love, to laugh at, and to hear the origins of our festival and sense where it may be going in the young voices of Samara and Rachel. It's an inspiration. Now, please join us tomorrow evening for a fiddle concert with Archetype Trad, two young women bringing their contemporary talents to the traditional. And of course, we have the readings from the great book at the Westmount Library on the 16th. And that will be the end of the festival this year, and we will hope to see you again next year. Check out our website for other events that we may be having. We'll definitely be scheduling a couple of events in the fall, and most of the events that we had during this year's festival will be on the website and on YouTube once we get them posted. It takes a couple of days to do that. So you can always check back, re-listen to these interviews and anything else you'd like to check out. So thank you again for being with us this afternoon, and happy Bloomsday.